Sarah Boone is back. She's pro se. She's putting blame on James Owens. Sarah Boone wants money. She's ignoring what the courts are saying. And the only thing she seems to have learned from her criminal trial is that you should cite case law. Now, I have to give a big shout out to Tanika's 2 cents. Her video is how I found out about the new family court update, and she has a long video already covering the document in full, and I will have that for you in the pinned comments, and I recommend you take a look. Also, Sarah Boone should be thanking Tanika's 2 cents because she is literally using her documents in the file. Now, I don't have the raw file to show you because I don't have an account on that site, but I can share some of the things from it that I want to talk about. And while I do that, I'm going to have this image of Sarah Boone next to me so that can burn into your brain. Now, Tanika might have shared the document with me if I sent an email, but to be honest, I am too impatient and I want to dive in right now into Sarah Boone. I paused every time it showed something to read it myself, get my thoughts before hers. So if we have similar thoughts, we must have the same wavelength. But honestly, I think everyone that's really dealt with Sarah has mostly the same thoughts. Number one is, I gotta say, right off the bat, and I mentioned it already, Sarah Boone is pro se in this filing, but it is typed. Thank you, it's not in Sarah Boone font. Brian is also not her only target. She wants sanctions on his lawyer. Sarah Boone's complaint is that once Sarah was arrested for the murder, Brian stopped the alimony and child support payments to her as agreed to in the settlement. He also, according to her, refused to follow the court-ordered parenting plan. Sarah does admit that Brian did give her some money, but not as much as the alimony. She also claims Brian ignored her demands to speak with her son and be included in parenting decisions. Now, I've talked about this before, but if you haven't watched Tanika, Sarah Boone has jail messages to Brian that Tanika 2 cents covers, and I highly recommend you at least skim through those videos. There's multiple long ones. Because you'll notice Sarah gets angry about not getting things, about presents not being purchased in her name. Sarah gets angry she doesn't have money to send messages, and she complains about this by sending messages. It's a wild ride. Now, I do have a question, though. Sarah's complaining about child support, right? If Sarah's in jail and then prison, why does she need child support? How are you supposed to not deviate a parental plan when you are incarcerated? Sarah claims that on September 19th, 2020, the court verbally instructed Brian to resume his alimony payments and follow the parenting plan. I remember Sarah claiming this before. No one could find a document. I don't know if she said it was verbal before, but as far as I'm aware, there's no document saying this. Sarah Boone complained, without the payments, it caused her bank account to close due to lack of funds. My guess, complete guess, is it's going to be due to maybe automated payments for subscription services, insurance, things like that. Do they have like automated delivery wine subscriptions in Florida? Maybe that was in it. Now, we have heard this before in her rants that her bank account was closed, but she chose a liaison to accept money, but Brian would just threaten to hang up instead of giving this person she wanted the money. Sarah Boone claims that when she would press him about not meeting his obligations, he would call her a killer, a murderer, speak of her accurately. He would mock her that there's nothing she will do. He would mock her by saying that she'll be working 3 jobs for the rest of her life, and the minor would not be allowed to see her because Sarah would be living in a shelter. But Brian is outright wrong for that, because Sarah is a murderer, and she will be working a prison job, and the minor won't be able to see her because she's in prison, and probably having her privileges taken away because she can't behave. April 11th, 2022, Sarah Boone filed a motion for contempt. 1 day later, Brian filed for modification because Sarah being in jail is a change. The son is now living with Brian because Sarah is in jail. And Sarah no longer needs alimony or child support because she is in jail. Also, and this gets mentioned later, in 2022, Brian lost his job. I mean, sounds like perfect storm of modification reasons. Sarah says, without the court approving it, Brian stopped paying the alimony and child support. And that is why Sarah couldn't secure legal representation. Now, when these files were public, I went through them, and I do believe at some point she had some form of representation. But does anyone believe that the lack of money is why she has to do this pro se? I don't think she could find a lawyer she could pay enough to handle her, even if she paid him all the money she claims she's owed. She also said Brian continues to deny Sarah communication and visits with the son, and at some point you have to ask, when does the son get a say? Brian can't strap him down and force him to talk to Sarah or message her. I even remember Sarah sending a letter to a judge wanting her son to be nicer to her. Sarah, your son doesn't have to like you. And I'm going to be honest, when he reaches, let's say, 13 at that age, if you're in prison and your son is 13 and he never wants to speak or see you again, it's really easy for them to do that. Really easy. You can't force them in that car to the prison if they don't want to go in. You can't force them in front of a screen. You can't force them onto a call. They are 13. There is a point where if you are incarcerated and the child that you have raised hates you enough, they never have to see you again. And that's what Sarah, I think, might be dealing with. Brian's lawyer filed for a motion for continuance on April 18, 2023. Now, he cited the scariest thing you can ever hear if you are Sarah Boone. Case law. Rosenblum v. Rosenblum. Which it says means that the court can't enforce the existing alimony and parental rights while the modification motion remained unresolved. So that motion way back, until that's resolved, the existing alimony and parental rights can't be paid. And I looked up the case, and from my understanding at a quick glance, the husband in that case started making less money, so he needed a modification. Which if you don't have the money to pay and you need a modification, you obviously can't keep paying while you're fighting to get that modification. I think that makes perfect sense. Sarah says that the case law was not about a change in the person receiving, therefore it's not applicable. But again, Brian lost his job at some point during this. Brian now has to take on full care of the son, whatever schooling and costs and needs. He's moving, right? Like all of these things come into change in his circumstance. Now, after that, let's see, what do we go here? I have some notes. 1 day later, the motion for the continuance was granted. And this is the important part, right? So, Brian files his motion, and then the motion for modification, and then later the motion for continuance is granted. The motion for continuance is citing case law saying he doesn't have to pay, so the judge is okay with this. Sarah complains that without the money that she wants, she can't afford legal counsel, writing utensils, stamps, or envelopes. I could almost guarantee that's been stated those are all provided as like part of their rights, because they have the appeals process. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I mean, also, Tanika's 2 cents has pulled up her purchases. Stop buying so many honey buns and maybe you could have a pen. The court told her that the tablet messages and phone calls are irrelevant. Which, if this is about a change in Brian's circumstance, they are. No matter what is in these phone calls and messages, Brian still lost his job. Brian still took on full care of the son. Brian moved. Sarah is in prison now. No matter what is in those messages and phone calls, those don't change. Sarah got a court notice about these proceedings. Sarah wants reconsideration of the continuance and to sanction Brian and to sanction Brian's attorney. Sarah argues that he can't use the case law cited because it's words escape me. He can't use the case law cited because it is about not being able to pay. Which is literally what Brian is partially arguing, in addition to Sarah being a murderer in prison, right? Like, Sarah tries to cite her own case law about using a procedural delay to evade paying. But again, this is the judge agreeing to the continuance, so it's not prosecutorial delay. The judge agreed, right? Sarah has a willful noncompliance and contempt section. She again, at least in my opinion, incorrectly asserts Tyndale v. Tyndale. The judge already made the ruling he doesn't have to pay right now. Then she cites Lamb v. Lamb, which says the court has the power to hold someone in contempt for not paying. But again, Brian at this point is following the judge's decision. Sarah cites Bowen v. Bowen, which appears to be about how Brian would have to prove he can't pay. Which again, that is what this whole fucking thing is about, Sarah. You're just citing case law because case law is what screwed you in your trial. Sarah claims that Brian and his attorney are violating her rights under the Florida Constitution by using her incarceration to obstruct her access to the courts. Sarah, you're filing to the courts right now. Sarah, when you were in, this is about from 2022 onward. Sarah, how many pages did I read you talking to the court? Sarah, you were at one point pro se defending yourself. No one has stopped your access to the courts, Sarah. Your criminal case is proof that never happened. But Sarah wants the court to sanction Brian and his lawyer to compel them to uphold Sarah's constitutional rights, whatever the hell that is. Sarah claims Brian's petition lacks merit. She cites Bowen v. Bowen again, claiming Brian hasn't shown a substantial change in financial circumstances, which again is part of this whole case, and we know he did, so what are you doing, Sarah? Sarah is arguing before the evidence, it seems, is even submitted. Sarah cites Hunter v. Hunter, which Sarah says rejected the notion that incarceration by itself is sufficient grounds of modification of custody. Now, I tried to look up this case myself as best I could, and as far as I can tell, it doesn't have anything to do with what Sarah is actually citing. It mentions findings for child custody modification, but it doesn't seem to be talking about someone incarcerated for life, or even, as far as I can tell, incarcerated at all. Maybe I missed that part, but it definitely doesn't match Sarah's circumstances. Sarah also cites Perez, which she says confirms the unilateral denial of parental rights violates the Florida custody laws, which, looking at this, doesn't seem to have anything to do with her circumstances. She is just trying to find case law so she can keep using it because she thinks probably that's why she lost in court. Sarah wants sanctions again, she mentions, for Brian and his counsel. Sarah said they did bad faith litigation by filing a meritless motion for continuance, which, remember, the judge accepted, so Sarah's argument is just moot at this point. She's wanting to sanction someone for something the judge said has merit because Sarah doesn't agree. Sarah cites Martinez v. Martinez for sanctioning a party for meritless delays and failure to comply with an alimony order. Well, it had merit according to the judge, and the case law, also cited, says he doesn't have to pay during this. Sarah also cites a Florida statute authorizing an award of attorney's fees for unnecessary prolongation of litigation due to baseless motions. My mind immediately goes back to Sarah complaining she wasn't paid for being her own lawyer for a little bit in her murder trial. Sounds like she wants to be paid for being her own lawyer here. Sarah then says Brian stopped payments before modification sanctions, so he should be sanctioned to prevent abuse of judicial resources, whatever the hell that is, trying to say. Sarah is continuing to ignore a judge already made a decision on him stopping the payment. At the end of the day, she's just ignoring what judges says. So before, I wondered if Sarah wanted to be paid for her own lawyer. Well, now she has a request for attorney's fees. She wants attorney's fees due to the financial hardships of Brian Boone not paying alimony. She cites case law, which she claims says that a financially disadvantaged spouse is entitled to attorney's fees to secure an attorney. I thought immediately that if Sarah, even if she got the money, she wouldn't hire a lawyer. She wouldn't be able to find one that would deal with her for whatever value she had, and then when she would demand that instead she should get to keep the money as she acts as her own lawyer. I think that's what she's wanting to do. And then we have a list of just what Sarah Boone is asking for. Reconsider the decision to grant a continuance to Brian due to lacking legal merit and does not justify non-compliance with court order. Deny Brian's motion for modification due to lack of substantial financial hardship. This is just Sarah wanting to continue to leech off of Brian. Geez, loud. Find Brian in contempt for non-compliance with alimony and child support. Enforce final judgment and underlying marital settlement and parental plan. Sanction Brian and his lawyer for filing a baseless motion for continuous and unnecessary delaying proceedings. It was not baseless. The judge granted it, Sarah. Give Sarah attorney's fees. Give Sarah anything else the court feels is appropriate. So now it moves on to enforcement of the marital settlement agreement and parental plan for sanctions, relief due to parental alienation. Sarah claims Brian has denied Sarah contact with the son, and she wasn't involved with parental decisions. He says Sarah has engaged in a pattern. She says Sarah has engaged. Wait, my brain is broken. Yes. She says he has engaged in a pattern of parental alienation and defamation. He is trying to sever the bond between her and her son because he called her a murderer and a killer. Sarah cites that her own son has said things like that to her. Sarah says this is psychological abuse to her and her son. So, Sarah Boone, the murderer, the convicted murderer, is arguing that someone calling her a murderer is psychological abuse to her and her son, and that her son calling her a murderer, I assume, is also psychological abuse to her and him? Sarah tries to cite more case law. I'm going to be honest, none of it seems to fit what she's trying to say. Sarah wants to force the parental rights agreement already in place unless modified, which I'm sure it will be modified, order Brian to give her a minimum of 3 calls a week with her son. And the son has to call her on all major holidays. I want you to take a moment and think about that. Brian wants to be done with Sarah. Brian's son, from everything it sounds like, wants to be done with Sarah. And Sarah is saying, 3 out of 7 days of the week, you have to call me. And every major holiday, you gotta talk to me. Sarah wants to be in their lives as much as she can. Why do I say as much as she can? The 3 calls is literally the max allowed. If she could get daily calls, I guarantee she'd do it. Every holiday. What if the son doesn't want to talk to his murderer mother? You can't force him, especially as he gets older. Sarah wants to be involved in all major decisions with the son. Sarah wants Brian in contempt again. She says he needs to file a modification first before changing the parental plan, which... You wanted the original plan, Sarah? You wanted him to drop him off in the jail? Sarah wants to force Brian to take a co-parenting course in counseling. This is sounding exactly like what she did with George. Put him in counseling to tell him that Sarah is actually always right, that you can never go against Sarah. She is victimizing Brian as much as she can, as close as she can, to how she was victimizing George. I really would love to know if she tried to force him into the style of counseling before their divorce. I would love to know that. I would love to know if she just has this pattern she always does. Because I'm assuming she does. At some point, she felt it worked, and she's just sticking to it. Sarah wants sanctions against Brian for parental alienation that make her parental powers even more in her favor. What does she want? She's already saying, I want to cap out calls every holiday. I need more. She's just trying to get power over people on the outside. And of course, Sarah wants anything else the court will give her. Sarah wants $1,000 a month in alimony. Sarah claims she's owed a balance of $61,000. Remember, Brian lost his job during all this, but she says he has the ability to pay, and cites more case law saying he must pay. And now we have child support. Sarah says it's $100 a month, and I'm sure you're wondering, how the hell does she keep getting child support in prison? Well, her excuse is that the parenting plan allows Sarah to use that child support at her discretion. I get the feeling it was her wine money. Some of her wine money. $100 a month isn't cutting it for her. And Sarah wants $6,100 in child support. Now we have a fun one. Recovery of wrongfully retained property. Sarah wants furniture, clothing, family heirlooms. Sure, let's load it into your cell. Do you want the suitcase too? Do you believe that George stole that suitcase from you? And Sarah wants her car. Sarah says Brian took these things and didn't return them. Sarah believes the vehicle may have been scrapped and the items were left in a storage unit put up for auction. I could 100% see a world where Brian says, as like when she's first in there, they don't know how long she's going to be in there. Look, I'll put all your stuff in storage, but you're going to have to find a way to pay. I'll pay it for X amount of time. And then Sarah couldn't pay it. She just assumed he would keep paying or would be forced to pay for her, which is what this whole thing is about, right? This whole thing is about Brian being forced to pay for Sarah because Sarah was a massive mistake in his life. So, to recap it, Sarah wants $61,000 in alimony, $6,100 in child support. She wants interest on all of that money. She wants Brian to be in contempt again. She wants Brian to track down all of her things. She wants Brian to return any of her things he has. She wants Brian to do an independent appraisal for missing things. So whatever Sarah says is missing, Brian then has to pay someone to figure out how much he should pay her. And then she wants him to pay damages if it's civil theft and whatever else the court will give her. Now, remember all that stuff against a continuance because a continuance is bad, according to Sarah? And if someone does a continuance without reason, they need sanctions. Well, Sarah Boone now wants a continuance. And a case management hearing, and pretrial discovery, and attorney fees, and costs. Sarah claims to have no access to writing tools, paper, stamps. She mentions the court denied her the phone calls and tablet messages she wanted. Sarah Boone comes in with someone new to blame as well. James Owens. Sarah Boone claims that James Owens refuses to return her family law documents and get back in contact with her. Sarah says being incarcerated, she can't get the tablet messages, the financial statements, phone calls, and other evidence. Due to Brian Boone not giving her money, Sarah can't pay for writing utensils, stamps, envelopes, or a lawyer, so she asks for an continuance. She wants that attorney money. Sarah Boone then presents evidence showing tablet messages, which remember, the judge has already told you are irrelevant. These are irrelevant. They don't matter. And the images she uses are taken from Tanika 2 cents because they have the watermark. I don't know if she has a public Google Drive. I don't know if she has something like that, but that's where they got them. They are using her watermark stuff. And then, like, it shows, like, some of the messages, and that, like, sometimes there were no shows when Sarah was scheduled to have a call with them. But at the end of the day, Sarah just wants to control people, right? Sarah is trying to get money, obviously, but this is also about control. She's not just wanting to control her son. She's wanting to control Brian. She's not just saying, I want to force my son to speak to me whether he wants to or not. Bad enough, right? I want to force Brian into counseling so he can have to think about me. I don't want to just force my son to have contact with me. I want to force my son to do it 3 times a week in every holiday. My son cannot have a Christmas without seeing my face. My son and his father can never have a holiday off away from Sarah Boone. It's a disgusting document. Now, as I said, this is a shortened version, partly because I only have so much time to record today. partly because I don't have the document itself saved that I can scroll through. Tanika 2 cents, again, in the pinned comments. It was a great video. I watched it. Highly recommend, again, especially if you've not seen any of these messages that she's being told are irrelevant. If you've not seen any of them, they are Tanika 2 cents has them. Sarah Boone is getting the documents from her in some way. I'm not saying she's giving them to her, but like someone's doing Sarah's bidding and getting these documents to her, right? I love how continuations were like vilified for so long in this, and then at the end Sarah's like, well, I need one. I hope Brian can be freed. I hope the son can be freed. I hope the son, if he never wants to contact Sarah, is never forced to again. But even if all those modifications happen, I get the feeling she'll try to find a way to file something against them. Because she needs control over what you would call loved ones, but to her, I think they're just pawns, right? She has ownership of Brian, of her son, of George. Anyway, hopefully I didn't go too fast. If I did, you might have to slow the video down a little bit. I know I talked a little fast because I'm trying to get this done in a time frame I can. She doesn't change. I think that's really the thing, right? And the only change you could say is, well, now she uses case law. Well, look. When Sarah Boone was first brought in, it was protocol. And she thought that was like a magic phrase. Well, now, because her case criminally got destroyed by case law, she thinks that she, as a non-lawyer, can cite case law, and it's some sort of magic savior button. I'm just going to put this out there at the very end. I'm really surprised Sarah Boone, because of her like love of this, simplifying things down to repeating phrases. I am amazed she has not tried to go like full sovereign citizen. And if she does, I wouldn't be shocked. Because she will cling to anything that she can easily repeat, doesn't take a lot of thought, but then she can use that to excuse her own actions. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one.